It's a huge pleasure to be able to participate. I apologize for not being with you in person. I'm in the UK, and as you might be hearing in the background, it's Guy Fawkes night. So there's lots of loud banging, and I hope that's not too distracting. The college next door to where I am is having a Guy Fawkes display this evening, celebrating not the burning of the Houses of Parliament, but stopping the burning of the House of Parliament. So I hope that's not too distracting, but if so, I can try and put in a microphone. What I would like to share is some thoughts about the future of capitalism and where we are, the impact of the pandemic. And in this, I would like to focus on particularly economic policies which could create a more sustainable world. Lizzie, could you just tell me if the fireworks is too distracting, and I could try and use a headset? Okay. You okay?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So what I have been focusing on in my most recent book, Rescue from Global Crisis to a Better World, is the idea that we are at an inflection point, and what the pandemic has done is to accelerate the transformation of societies, the pendulum swing, and that this is an absolutely crucial time for policy making and for ensuring that we do set in place the foundations of a different world. And so it's very appropriate, I think, that the Center on Capitalism and Society at 20th Anniversary Conference is focused on these issues. What has happened, of course, and what governments are now doing would have been absolutely unimaginable in January of 2020. The pandemic has demonstrated forcefully that when we want to, we can mobilize resources, we can do things that are regarded as being outside the orthodoxy, and we can do them very, very quickly. $20 trillion of stimulus, of forbearance, of monetary easing from the OECD economies found overnight, when this would have been regarded as simply impossible in January 2020. And so the key question is this going to continue, or are we going to revert to what we had before? I get very scared by talk of bounce back or bounce forward, because that implies that we're bouncing back or forward along the same tracks, along the same road that we're on. But it's that road which has led us to this totally unsustainable system that we're in, a system that has brought us the pandemic, that has brought us catastrophic climate change, that's bringing rising inequality, that's led to a stagnation in productivity. And so my hope is not that we reset, because reset implies that we go back to the operating system which existed before, or that we bounce back or we bounce forward along the same tracks which are leading us over a precipice. My hope is that this pandemic can provide the wake-up call to do things permanently differently. And of course, as we're meeting today, the COP26 discussions are going on in Glasgow on exactly this. Are we able to do things? Are we able to imagine a different form of capitalism, not only with moving to net zero carbon emissions, but a capitalism which allows for inclusive and sustainable growth, which allows for improvements in livelihoods? And one of the things that's come out so dramatically from this is that whereas the rich governments have found $20 trillion for themselves, a simply enormous amount of money, unimaginable amount of money, the size of the US economy sort of scale, where they found that almost overnight, nothing has been found of any comparable significance for developing countries. And we're in a much worse situation than we were in the 2008-9 crisis, which George W. Bush convened the G7, then G20 meeting, and there was solidarity, debt restructuring, and other related activities. This time, there's no comparable outreach to development. Indeed, what we're seeing is a shying away from it. In the UK, aid has been cut by a third. And around the world, because aid is as a share of GNI, there have been lower transfers. In fact, less than 1/4% of the stimulus package that's been found by the rich countries for themselves has been found for solidarity with developing countries. And so this pandemic is leading to a great divide within countries and between them, and notably between the advanced economies who have fiscal space, who have monetary space, and those that don't have that luxury. So the key question going forward is, of course, how do we restructure that system? Another key question which we need to focus on deeply, I believe, is the future of globalization, by which I mean the flows across national borders of goods, services, people, and of course, most significantly, finance and ideas. And it's the ideas which have moved so rapidly with digital connectivity, embodied in my connecting with you today. It's this digital connectivity which is leapfrogged. And people are talking about deglobalization, but when you look at the various metrics, what is very clear is that globalization in many respects has accelerated. Thankfully, it's accelerated in science with the production not only of a vaccine, but distribution. Not enough globalization. Less than 6% of Africans have been double vaccinated. We've seen digital leapfrogging and connectivity with good ideas like wearing masks, and it's good to see people wearing masks in the conference, being vaccinated, etc., but also terrible ideas like the anti-vax movement. And this contesting of ideas is taking place more aggressively, and the challenges for moderate people, for people who do not like to raise their voice, is that the extremes take over. And we saw this, of course, in the terrible expression of the invasion of the Capitol. It's that extremism which is fostered by these crises. I do not believe we would have had President Trump in the White House. I do not believe we would have had Brexit in Britain had it not been for the financial crisis. The total failure of the system to manage, the total failure of our finance ministers, our central banks, our highly paid commercial bankers to manage an integrated financial system. And so the great challenge for globalization is, I believe, what I've termed in the previous work, the butterfly defect. This challenge of managing hyper interconnected, complex dynamic systems, the nodes and networks, and of course, the responsibilities that go with it. It's not just that every cyber center can become the source of a cyber virus, every financial center the source of a financial crisis, every airport the source of a pandemic. It's that goods add up to bads. It's wonderful that 1.5 billion people have got energy for the first time over the last 30 years. But that is leading to an escalation of the climate crisis. It's wonderful that another 500 million people have got access to antibiotics. But that is leading to antibiotic resistance, which will mean that no antibiotics in the world are effective. With our growing freedom, we failed to take on growing responsibility. And this challenge between becoming wealthier, gaining liberty, and taking on responsibility is, I believe, at the center of a discussion on the future of capitalism. Are we able to embrace all that is good about capitalism in terms of the liberating force of creative destruction, the ingenuity, the development of jobs and livelihoods that comes from investment and private individual decisions around that, at the same time accepting that as we go richer and as we become more interconnected, the responsibility grows on each of us to be more regulated, more self-regulated, and to have a greater ethical basis for our actions. The spillovers, the externalities of all our actions grow as we become richer and more connected. And it's that challenge, that balance, that I believe is at the heart of it. Ned has written so eloquently about the dangers of societies not taking risk. But what we see in a society like Denmark is this extraordinary ability of people to take risk but not lose their livelihoods when they do so. The extraordinary ability of a safety net which guarantees people livelihoods even if they lose their jobs, livelihoods even if their firms go bankrupt, allowing a wonderfully dynamic creative destruction. And the challenge for creative destruction is not only for the entrepreneurs that find that they may lose their jobs, but also, of course, for the individuals who don't want to take risks. It's appropriate that as I speak, the fireworks are going out louder and louder outside in the college next door, because we're going through a period of, I believe, unprecedented fireworks. Fireworks in the amount of experimentation that's happening. Countries around the world doing things differently. Countries around the world exploring new ways of regulation, of supporting workers, and of course, huge amounts of unprecedented monetary stimulus. This has got to come to an end, this monetary stimulus. We're seeing the inflationary pressures, and we're seeing the dangers of a cycle of too cheap money, the growth of zombie firms, the extraordinary forbearance has not been healthy. Until we are able to have a more competitive environment, it's inevitable that productivity will remain stagnant. But we need to be able to ensure that in that competitive environment, we do not put people's lives and livelihoods at risk. And that is why the creation of a safety net is so vital. That is why guaranteeing people access to health, to education, to housing at affordable rates is at the center of any project, I believe, on creating an inclusive capitalist society. We can do this, and it's been shown in place after place, but I believe that some of the things being talked about need rethinking. Universal basic income, which is one of the great topics of conversation, is, in my view, the wrong approach. Basic income, yes, ensuring that everyone has a decent life, but universal, no, for many reasons. Simply the arithmetic not adding up, that it increases poverty because it's a substitute for other transfers like housing, unemployment, disability, etc. That people get meaning, respect, self-worth, networks, and skills through work. We should aim for societies of full employment. As Angus Deaton has so eloquently written about the diseases of despair, societies that depend on hand-downs are societies which are unsustainable socially, which lead to mental illness and other crises. Excuse me for that disruption. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
For some reason, Zoom froze, but I've come in on another machine. I was talking about UBI and the shortcomings of UBI, and I hope that you got that whole discussion. But it's also the case that the future of work will be totally different as a result of automation, robotics, 3D printing, and other technological shifts. And it's that shift which, in my view, is likely to result in a very different demand. We will see the need for massive movements in societies, skilled people doing different jobs, places that grow and places that decline, and with that, a need for greater flexibility. Flexibility in where people are, what they do, how they reskill. And so entering into this debate, not about UBI, which I think is a red herring, but about how will we sustain societies? What is the future of work? And what sort of education and other systems do we need in order to create that is, I believe, central. And in my view, what the UBI debate is doing is to postpone that more fundamental conversation about the future of our societies and work. There are also very important conversations to be had about the relationship of technological change to tax revenues, the regulatory issues around superstar firms, and of course, the questions regarding why hasn't this yet transferred into productivity improvements. That fundamental question that many of you have been engaged in, and with, of course, Solo raised so long ago, remains an absolute puzzle. We've been doing deep analytic work on this. I have 4 postdocs working full-time on this and have been doing so for the last 3 years. And we've gone through the 22 different sorts of explanations about productivity stagnation, those ranging from mismeasurement to the belief that it hasn't yet permeated business processes, the sort of arguments that Eric Bjornenson and others are making, to views that the labor market has various issues ranging from aging to the lack of migrants, to rigidities, and even on the other extreme to excessive flexibilities with too much gig working and not enough investment in people. The arguments around the knowledge tree and the knowledge factory and whether that's somehow broken, either because the patent system is broken, because all the easy ideas have been taken, because ideas are becoming more complex and therefore difficult to connect. And when you look at the average age, for example, of journal article authors and the number of collaborators on journal articles, there's a little bit of evidence for that. There are also many arguments around the firm, ranging from the fact that monetary easing has led to excessive quantitative easing, low interest rates, and too many zombie firms, to superstar firms basically vacuum cleaning up competition and undermining the production of new ideas from new firms. This range of 22 different explanations for the stagnation in productivity is, I believe, where we need to place greater emphasis. Because unless we are able to restore productivity, there can be no basis for shared prosperity in capitalism in the future. It is absolutely fundamental. And unfortunately, the easy answers, such as mismeasurement, don't get very far. We have to have an explanation that satisfies 3 criteria. The first is whatever it is that's undermining productivity has to be of a scale in our economies that it's economy-wide influence. In other words, something like the mismeasurement of the digital economy, which only accounts for less than 10% of GDP, cannot be an explanation why productivity has fallen in half, even if you have 100% mismeasurement. Beaumont disease, similarly, which is a very credible explanation that a greater and greater share of economic activities in services which don't lend themselves to productivity enhancement, like education and health, is also unlikely to be the cause, because that is a slow secular process, like aging and like so many other things that people point to. And yet we saw over a period of 3 years a halving of productivity growth rates in the early 2000s. And by the way, that happened before the financial crisis. So explanations that this was somehow related to the financial crisis have got their sequencing wrong.
So the one question is sequencing, another is scale, and the third is the global impact of this. Because it's not just that productivity has declined, growth has declined in the US, it's done so across Europe, and it's even done so in countries like China, where it went from, say, 6% to 4%, not of the orders of magnitude and the slowness of Europe or the US, but about the same time. And so as we search for an explanation for this global decline in productivity, we picked up various aspects of this. We do think that failures in competition policy have been pretty central to this, and the growth of superstar firms, particularly in technology areas, and that we need to urgently think that. We think the decline in fundamental research has been pretty central, and that the austerity packages which led to a decline in investments in health and in physics and in other areas have underpinned this. We think there is an issue regarding the support for research more generally, postdoctoral and other research, and the availability of funding for that, declining research expenditure. We think there's something around Bowman's disease, but it's not of the order of magnitude which can account for this. And so we've identified 3 or 4 factors which we think, above all else, account for this. And it's certainly not the simple ones like mismeasurement. We also do not believe that we can simply have faith in the argument that we just need to wait, that once businesses adopt new technologies, we will see the productivity enhancement. This, unfortunately, is not likely to be the case. And so in a conference celebrating the 20th anniversary of capitalism and society, we can be greatly heartened by this vibrant atmosphere around us of a deep rethinking which has been associated with the pandemic, a deep rethinking which has been associated with the discussions of the move to new energy forms, a deep rethinking about the future of work and about sustainable capitalism. The center of capitalism and society has been at the heart of that discussion over the past 20 years. It will continue to be. I'm extremely sorry I cannot be with you, not only to be able to share in all the learning, but also to see you informally. My hope is that we will have a 21st and many more celebrations of the Center of Capitalism Society, and I look forward to joining you in the future. Thank you.
So I think we do have time for just one question, if there is one. All right, Ned.
Well, thank you very much for that. Without being provocative, I'm wondering why you like so much the idea of, I forget what you call it, but just ways of sustaining people, as many people as want it, as long as they want it, versus the more austere approach of such people as John Rawls. And I'd like to join that group, who strongly favor subsidizing wages to pull up wages so that everybody who wants to work can make a good living.
I think minimum wages, Ned, firstly, it's great to see you again. And I'm really sorry I can't give you a hug, which is what I would like to do. But I believe subsidizing or supporting wages, and there are different ways one can do this. One can do it institutionally, minimum wages, and through institutions like trade unions, and different ways of doing it is one aspect of it. But what I really strongly believe in is we should support churn. We should support people leaving jobs. We should support people feeling that they can change where they are. The people in the Midwest of the US's problem is that they don't have jobs and they can't get to where the jobs are. And so flexibility and giving people, say, vouchers, housing vouchers, school vouchers, the transport vouchers, the ability to move. When I interviewed people 20 miles from Chicago about why they didn't go to Chicago for a job, it was quite extraordinary. You know, these people couldn't afford to get to Chicago, but there were jobs in Chicago. There was no public transport system to get them there. And so how you get from one bad equilibrium into a positive equilibrium, I think, is at the heart. And I think, and I certainly am very taken by the evidence I've seen from Denmark and other societies that do this, that have higher rates of employment, higher rates of small business creation, higher rates of investment, because people have a security that if they lose their job, they won't starve to death. So some basic, I think for civilized societies, we need some basic minimum. Now, that minimum is not going to be the equivalent of a wage. It will never compete with a decent job, but it will mean that you and your family can live. And so I think it's really a question of, do you provide that basic safety net for society, which allows people to have a decent life, allows children to go to school, allows people to get free education and health and other needs if they do fall through that safety net, or fall out of jobs. But of course, jobs are first.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you very much, and apologies for the slip up and for the bangs in the background if they were distracting.